Hello and welcome to MASHmouth, a podcast covering every single episode of the hit 1970s sitcom MASH. I'm Ethan.
And I'm Vanessa.
Vanessa, hello. Once again, we don't have any kind of opening topic for this episode. These episodes, as it turns out, are not very relatable to our everyday lives.
No, they're not. We just want to wish everybody happy holidays and a happy new year because this will be going out in 2023.
Yes, our first episode of 2023. Kind of insane that it's already 2023. That is wild to me. We started talking about this podcast in 2020. We're old.
I know it's not like a new or hot take to be like, wow, it feels like 2020 was still like yesterday, but it really does.
It really, really does. It's just a black hole where it's like, oh, my life kind of like stopped for a while in 2020, and suddenly it's much later, and we're just here now. So anyway, let's get into this episode of MASH and just have a good time talking about it.
Yes, definitely.
So, this episode is called Officer of the Day, and when Hawkeye is assigned Officer of the Day, he has to deal with the return of Colonel Flagg, several Korean civilians in need of medical attention, and Klinger's attempts to escape to Seoul. Vanessa, what did you think of this episode?
So, I'm not sure how I really felt about this episode. Like, I struggled with this episode because I did enjoy it, but I feel like, and of course, like, we'll get into it, but I feel like it wrapped up kind of quickly. It was a good episode, but it was also very, like, strange. I think that anything with Colonel Flagg in it is going to be, like, kind of good, but also kind of terrible.
I feel you. Obviously, I'm still less familiar with the legacy of Colonel Flagg as the show goes on, but this episode was definitely more coherent. The debut episode with him in it is absolute whackball nonsense territory. And this one, like, had a plot and, like, a message that it was trying to say, but it did kind of feel like two episodes kind of mushed together. It's definitely not bad, but I feel like the kind of two storylines don't come together that well, and Colonel Flagg isn't quite the same as he was in, like, the previous episode where he was just kind of like a goofy character. This time they're trying to play him straight, and I don't know how well that worked, but, like, still pretty solid overall when you, like, look at each individual kind of moment.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that it felt like two kind of storylines converging into one, and I don't know how well that really worked because the first definitely was different than the latter half of the episode, and it was just kind of like a strange amalgamation of two separate ideas into one. I don't know, very, very weird, but, like, I do think that this version of Colonel Flagg, like you said, is less goofy and definitely more serious. But I feel like in later episodes that he's in, it's kind of a hybrid of both types of Colonel Flagg, where it's just like, oh, he's like there for a serious purpose, but also he's still like goofier. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It was kind of strange.
Yeah, because they're definitely trying to do, like, commentary with him. They're trying to, like, make a point about the military and the CIA with him. So it was kind of strange to see that after just how much of an absolute, like, farce of a character he was before.
Yeah.
But let's get more into the actual, like, plot.
Yeah, for sure.
So this opens with Frank in command, and as usual, when they're trying to do Frank in command, every single time the, like, bugle calls, always horrible, never played right, and I always find that very funny. And this is a really good Radar episode because this is maybe my favorite Radar bit in the entire show so far, where a cannon is fired at Radar's, like, bugle kind of accidentally, and he just, like, flips out. He, like, loses his entire mind. It's one of my like, favorite things that Radar's done. It was so funny.
Yeah, and he, like, charges at Igor, who is the person who fired the cannon, and it's just, like, it's very, like, it's almost out of character for Radar, but you're like, ooh, what is this spicy side of Radar right now?
This is an aggressive Radar in this episode. We get a lot of, like, Radar kind of out of character almost, where he's kind of more grown up, kind of like more of an actual like dude.
Mm-hmm.
Even though part of this episode involves his little teddy bear, there's a lot of Radar kind of being like frustrated and angry. And Radar's never like really angry. This is like an episode where he's like mad at a lot of people. It's pretty fun.
I was reading that as him just kind of being like over Frank's like quote unquote command of him just like making them do all of this ridiculous stuff. And then like that was the straw that broke the camel's back of just like, really, dude? Like, why are we doing this?
So Frank is always conducting these absolutely garbage like inspections of people. And he goes down the line and he's like, one guy who's like 5 o'clock shadow, he writes up for having too heavy of a beard on the battlefield. And then he inspects some guy's gun. And I don't know if this is protocol, but he like looks into the like muzzle of the what's the thing where
like
the bullet comes out of?
The barrel of the gun.
Yeah, he looks into the barrel of the gun, and I'm like, you should, even if this is like in theory like what military people are supposed to do, I don't know. You shouldn't do that. You're gonna shoot yourself in the face. I hope that was something that like people don't actually do. That scared me.
That was quite alarming to me. I'm like, did Frank really just like point a gun at himself like that? Like that can't be good. And supposedly those guns are loaded too. Like, why did he do that? That was very concerning.
With this show, I don't know if that was like a joke about him being incompetent or just a thing that like you're supposed to do when inspecting a gun. I really hope that you're not supposed to look into the barrel of the gun when inspecting it.
If anyone knows, please tell us. Please loop us in, because like honestly, that was quite concerning to like lay viewers like us.
Yeah. And then we come to Klinger, and Klinger, as always, looks fabulous, and Frank's not having a single second of it. This time, he's actually in, like, male uniform, but he's got some colored nails, he's got some high heels, he's pulling it off, he's looking delightful, and he wants a trip to Seoul is his big thing for this episode. And I was surprised that like came back. I thought that would be like a one-off joke of like in this inspection. He's like, oh, I want a trip to Seoul. But in this entire episode, he's like really trying to make his escape to Seoul. And I thought that was pretty funny of Klinger to do.
He wasn't even gunning for like, hey, I want to get discharged. Frank, discharge me. He was just like, just give me some like rest, dude, please. And I don't know if you noticed, but Klinger's ring matched the earrings that he had on. And,
I did not notice that.
I just hate that Frank is so, Frank just doesn't understand good fashion sense, clearly. Yeah, and honestly, clearly, like, I was trying to make a Frank Burns, like, burn on Frank, but it didn't work. But Frank is a killjoy, it basically is what I'm trying to get at.
He clearly has no sense of style.
Yes, no sense of style. I was hoping that Margaret would be like, when Margaret was like, high heels, I was like, girl, like, those high heels are cute. Like, what are you talking about?
See, I like that Klinger wanted to go to Seoul for Mother's Day, because it just reminded me of the excuse he gave of his mother being pregnant and also dying and also having, like, 50 other things wrong with her. That was, like, a nice, subtle callback to the relationship between Klinger and his mom that is apparently very strange.
Yes, yeah, definitely. That's so funny.
And then, right after this, and, you know, Frank blows up at Klinger, he just kind of stops the inspection, even though there's like 5 other people like waiting to be inspected. He's like, well, we're done. Anyway, I'm retiring to my bunk for the weekend. Hawkeye's in charge. Peace out. And that felt very strange for Frank. Normally he's not one to give up power, but I guess everybody gets tired. I don't know.
Yeah, so this is part of the reason why I just didn't know what to feel about this episode, because I was super confused about the officer of the day thing, because he of course he assigns that duty to Hawkeye, and I'm like, okay, so clearly like this is just so that we can have like Hawkeye dealing with a lot of stuff because Alan Alda's the main character. Got it. Okay, cool. But also I was like, so these are all things when Hawkeye is doing his like officer of the day duties. These are all things that like Henry deals with on a daily basis. Why is like officer of the day not a thing except when You know what I mean? I was like, why isn't Frank taking care of all of this stuff? I was just like so confused about all of it because I could definitely see like a plot of the episode of like Frank trying to deal with this and like Hawkeye and Trapper just being like, hey, like, you know, and being very frank about it. And Hawkeye and Trapper just being like, hey, Frank, stop being so frank about it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know how real life. I assume this is a thing, like in the actual military.
Yeah,
the
and like
officer of the day.
That's the thing, is that I looked it up. I was like, what is officer of the day supposed to be? I thought it was like maybe a thing of like, oh, if your commanding officer is gone, then like they have like the second in command give like officer of the day, blah, blah, blah. But no, it's just like, it's supposed to be like a very like normal, everyday type of thing, apparently. And I was just like, well, we never saw this before, but okay.
This sounds so stupid, but it like reminded me of like hall monitor duty. Like they treated it like it was Hawkeye's like turn to be hall monitor for the day. So like that's just kind of how I took it, but I didn't really question why Frank was like relinquishing power. I was just like, okay, sure. He and Margaret, the joke he makes about he and Margaret like always being intimate with each other, like the like Freudian slip was pretty good. Because Margaret, like, looks at, like, I think radar is like, ugh. It was, like, pretty fun.
Yeah.
But anyway, Hawkeye, now officer of the day, and my man's tired. He is sleeping his way through it. What do you think of this whole bit with him dealing with Henry's duties? Because it's basically just this one scene, really.
Yeah, so right before this, though, I don't know if you thought the same, but there were so many great lines in the scene where Hawkeye is given Officer of the Day duties. Yeah. It was so good. Like this is why I do like this episode, because I thought the comedy was done very well. Like the writing was very well done. And also, I don't know if you know this, but the whole like speech that Hawkeye gives of just like refusing to carry a gun, that's like super famous in the MASH fandom.
Oh, is it?
Just, like,
that makes sense.
I'll carry your books, carry a torch, like all that kind of stuff. That is like peak MASH like humor when someone's talking about the show. You know what I mean?
I'll Harry carry, but I will not carry a gun. I don't know.
I'll Harry carry if you show me
is.
how. It's a dance, I'm pretty sure.
But like, yeah, that whole bit was really fun. If it wasn't so long, I would have wrote it down to be like the line.
I wrote the whole ass thing down. Don't you worry. I'm just sparing everybody, because anybody who has like watched this episode and knows MASH like really well knows that this is like the I'll carry a gun like monologue, basically.
Yeah. No, all the lines in this one were really good. I agree with you.
I do think that this was like kind of the start of like the whole commentary on the episode where Hawkeye is like, I'm not carrying this gun. Like, there's no way. Mm-hmm. And that kind of like sets off the whole thing of just like Hawkeye kind of being this pacifist, like, hey, I'm a doctor. My job in general and my job in this war is to save people's lives and like put people back together after they've been like destroyed by guns. I'm not going to carry this thing that, you know, kills people, because that's not what I'm here to do. It also got me thinking of like the Vietnam War in general, of like kind of anti-violence, anti-war sentiment. And I feel like that kind of probably colored the whole reason for this. Also, I was thinking of Hacksaw Ridge, because this was like a real thing. So I won't go into that whole thing. But yeah, I did think that this was well done commentary to start with the episode, especially juxtaposing it with Frank's like hyper military patriotism type of thing, and then Hawkeye just being so unwilling to carry a gun.
No, I really like Hawkeye's pacifism and how much he kind of always is looking out to do like the right thing as a doctor. And even later on in this episode, I forget the circumstance, he's like on the phone with somebody and he's like telling them like, we're doctors here. The best thing that we could do is charge the enemy and take out their tonsils. He's always in the mindset of like, I'm here to help people. I'm not here to fight the war. And even in like a very minor way of like carrying a gun while being the officer of the day, he's like, no, I won't do that. The way they characterize him, I think, is very strong in this episode, even though this sort of plot line about him being in charge doesn't really last like all throughout the episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I thought it was really endearing, the scenes with, this is kind of interspliced throughout the rest of the episode too, but right after this, he begins dealing with these wounded Korean civilians. And the first man, he presents his like identification card, and he seems like also like super grateful to Hawkeye in his like very limited English. He's just like, Harry Truman's the best, like, yay. And it was just like really sweet. And then I also felt like along the same lines of that, of just like Hawkeye kind of just like being there to be a doctor. He just notices that everybody's using the same identification card. And I just thought that that was so poignant as well, of this like war going on. And I don't know, I'm not like making the best point, but like I really enjoyed the part about them treating the civilians and whatnot, because I just thought that it was very well done.
Yes, if this was, I don't want to say a worse episode, but like a different episode, that would be like the conflict of like, Frank doesn't want to treat these guys using the one ID card. It would be like a whole thing. But because it is just Hawkeye in charge of the camp for the day, he's just like, oh, okay, it's fine. We'll see you on through. It's like multiple men, multiple women, all kind of using this one card. So it's not even like a subtle thing. Like, it's very obvious that they're all just doing this because they're like, oh, this guy will treat us. Which is just very, very nice to see Hawkeye kind of be able to do this without the usual like Frank roadblocks or like Henry having to worry about like the military protocol. Just because he's in charge, he gets to be like, yeah, don't worry about it. We'll fix you right up and send you on home.
Yeah, and I think that that kind of like goes into the main contention of this episode of like Flagg brings this wounded North Korean soldier who Hawkeye thinks is a civilian. Like, I don't know. Like, I thought this was also interesting because I wasn't sure what the episode was like kind of trying to say. Like, Hawkeye says like, hey, this is a civilian, and Flagg is like, no, he's like a North Korean spy. And so you don't really like, I feel like you don't get real confirmation of like whether it is one way or the other. And I thought that was like a very interesting part of this episode too. And Flagg is like, hey, I need him patched up because I'm going to go like execute him because he's a spy. And I was like, wow, that was a tone shift for this episode.
Now that we're talking about this, the episode is a little more cohesive than my initial impression because like the thing is that like this whole episode is about Hawkeye not wanting to do harm to anyone, including carrying this gun, and not wanting to have this young man executed for maybe no good reason. So, like, at first when watching this, I was like, it's weird that the Hawkeye in charge kind of, you know, stops basically, and it becomes a Colonel Flagg wants to murder a man and we have to stop him episode. But it's all like, well, Hawkeye's in charge, so he gets to kind of be the one to deal with Colonel Flagg. So it is a little more like all coming together than I initially thought. But still, Colonel Flagg is such a weird presence in this episode. Like, he shows up, and it's like the Stanley Kubrick shot of him, like, on the Jeep with his, like, leg over it on, a low angle, and you're immediately like, oh, okay, hello, friend, what's up? And he's, like, doesn't remember Hawkeye's name at all, and there's, like, some goofy stuff, but they still try to, like, make him kind of intimidating. So it was, like, an interesting kind of balance, you know?
Yeah, and like I told you this before, but I realized why people don't like Colonel Flagg now, because he's like an asshole. So like I feel like this was like the first instance where we had like Colonel Flagg, like as like named Colonel Flagg. He was like at the end of one of the spectrums of himself. Like he was at the end of the spectrum of him being like goofball Colonel Flagg. This was the complete opposite end where he is like hard ass military intelligence CIA man. And in my head, Colonel Flagg like typically is in the middle of that. You know what I mean? Okay. Which is why I was like, oh yeah, like Colonel Flagg, he's not that bad, right? But like, no, in this episode, he's like pretty bad.
Yeah, I get you. It's fun that he has this kind of range to him. And I imagine the unpredictability of like, he could show up at any time. So you don't know what Colonel Flagg you're going to get if it's like spy versus spy or like a real Colonel Flagg commentary episode. But, and this is not to like diminish Edward Winters at all, like his performance. But this character's so odd that, like, centering an episode around him, you're like, I don't know if this fully works, my dude.
I think I said it in the first episode that he was in. It's just like, if he's in an episode, you know, like, shenanigans are happening. Whether they're good or bad, like, you don't know. But they're definitely, shit's, like, going down with Colonel Flagg in an episode.
Yeah. Also, I have to mention right before Colonel Flagg shows up, and it's after Hawkeye treats, I think, the first Kim Luck. He kind of goes into, I guess, Henry's like cot and just like collapses down onto it. And I'm like, I need that as a GIF so that whenever I'm done editing these episodes, I can just send that to you. Because my GIF for you when I'm done recently has been like, from Kiki's delivery service of her falling on that bed. And I need Hawkeye falling on a cot to really sell it, you know?
I want to learn how to make a GIF just so I can do that. But it's so funny that you say that, because Hawkeye in this scene says one of my favorite MASH quotes ever, where he goes, "I'm not sleeping, I'm inspecting the inside of my eyelids." That is my favorite MASH quote. When I was younger, I said that constantly, and everyone was like, what are you talking about? I was just like, no, I'm clever because Hawkeye said it.
See, that is such a thing with like my mom will just like fall asleep on the couch and be like, I wasn't asleep, my eyes were just closed, I was just shutting my eyes, it was relaxing.
That's definitely a mom thing.
My eyes. And it just really reminded me of her, and I'm glad that you love that quote, because I'm like, that quote's like a good one, you know?
It's my all-time like favorite MASH quote. I like, hands down, that's the one that comes to my mind all the time. That's
the one that's in your everyday life. You're not telling people you're gonna Harry carry. You're telling people you're gonna fall asleep or inspect the inside of your eyelids.
Yes, absolutely.
And then somewhere in here, I don't know when to bring this up because it's kind of from here, there's kind of only a few scenes left, right? We've kind of talked about most of the thrust of the episode. It ends very quickly. Not exactly like paced super well, but I want to bring up this one scene with Radar getting changed and like Hawkeye like looking at him. And in the 50th anniversary special we did, they talked a lot about the scene and how they could not get through it. So watching this one, all I could think about was Alan Alda and Gary Berghoff just losing their mind for like half a day of shooting.
Like every time they looked at each other, they were just like hysterically laughing. They just couldn't do it. Apparently, and I don't know if this is true or not, but apparently that's like typically cut out of syndicated episodes. I don't know if that's true. Like, I can't speak to that, but that's just something that I read. And I'm just like, I wonder if it's just because I like couldn't get like a typical like good shot of it, because it was like, you could tell that it was like cut together.
Yeah, it was
like they couldn't do it.
Maybe it's too much Radar, like too much skin, you know? They're like, oh, this is too hot for TV.
I also want to give a shout out to Klinger's attempted escapes.
Oh, yeah.
The best one being when he's in a nun outfit.
That was pretty good.
So the MPs come and they're like, yeah, we got him trying to escape. And he goes to Hawkeye. He's like, I was just taking a walk. And he's just in this nun outfit. Oh my God, it was just the best.
And then Hawkeye's like, that looks bad on me. I can't report that, like, we lost a hairy nun or something like that. It's really good, man.
It was a good scene.
All these bits are really good.
So along the same lines as well of like, all this comedy is kind of like interspliced into, more like, I would say heavier scenes, again, with like Hawkeye and Trapper coming to realize that Colonel Flagg is going to be executing this patient that he's saying like, hey, I need you to get him better just so that I can then put him in front of a firing squad, which is like very jarring. And also with like Hawkeye treating multiple people with the same ID card. And then there's also this one scene that I thought was very well done. It was super subtle of these kids. They were stealing a bunch of stuff from the swamp. I almost
completely forgot about these kids. I'm sorry.
No, yeah, it was super quick. Like, they were only in 2 scenes. And I thought it just kind of tied the episode together. I can't exactly put my finger on why all of these like scenes with the civilians and Flagg and these kids really like tied together well. But it really did, in the sense of like, hey, remember that these are people too. Like, we're here in a war, and like, it's not just these American soldiers and these American doctors who are being impacted. It's these kids too. Like, they're not stealing to be bad kids. They're stealing because their country is being torn apart. And like, the people who are presenting the same ID card, like, they're not presenting the same ID card to like be deceitful or purposely deceitful. It's just like they probably like had their ID cards like misplaced, or they might be technically like North Korean civilians that need like South Korean help. You know what I mean? It's just like, it was very well done. And like I said, I can't entirely wrap my mind around exactly what I want to say, but if you watch the episode, like, it's vibes, you know?
Yeah. This episode, like we've been saying, is kind of messy. It's not like a perfect, well-oiled episode, but you do get a lot of like actual kind of daily life of living in Korea, more than you do in a lot of like, there are just a lot of civilians hanging around this one, like with these kids. Like, it's just kind of it's like normalized in this one a lot, where it isn't even brought up that much that like these kids are like trying to steal stuff. It's not like a big deal, other than when they take Radar's teddy bear. But even then, it's not like a huge deal. It's just like, come on, give it back. You get a lot of these like ancillary people that are just around the camp, and I thought that like kind of made the world feel more lived in than it typically kind of feels like. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that you said that kind of clarified it in my mind of just like, oh yeah, this is showing the everyday life of what it is like, not just on a MASH unit, but a MASH unit in Korea, and what the Korean people have to deal with, and kind of meshing those two things together. And yeah, I thought that it was just really well done. Even though the episode felt like a little bit disjointed at times, it was a well done piece of commentary about what they were trying to say.
I agree. And I liked when the kids were trying to steal the phone, and they're like, oh, we weren't doing anything. That's a very, like, kid thing, you know?
Yeah, they're like, someone said we could have this. It's just like, I don't think that's the case, kids.
I don't think that's true, buddy. So, it's pretty good. This one's actually much better than I initially thought. Like, we usually say, like, oh, these episodes get better once we talk about them. But, like, this one, I'm really like, no, this is actually, like, a really kind of good one. You know what I mean? Yeah,
for sure. I agree. And I guess we should talk about, like, the actual end as well.
Yeah.
So, basically, Hawkeye and Trapper are trying to stall Flagg taking this young North Korean supposed spy to be executed, and comes to a head in the mess tent where he brings in Frank and Margaret and is like, hey, like, force this doctor to like sign over this patient to me, basically. And I thought it was very interesting that Flagg was like pulling a gun on Hawkeye. I'm like, I'm gonna shoot you if you don't sign this patient over. And I'm like, why didn't Hawkeye just like kind of call his bluff and be like, no, dude, like, shoot me then. Okay.
I feel like Flagg would shoot him, though. I feel like he doesn't care at all. Like, he would.
That's true. I think that I was thinking that because we got, like, less unhinged Flagg and more, like, hyper-military Flagg in this episode. I'm like, he's not going to shoot him. But honestly, unhinged Flagg would shoot Hawkeye.
I feel like he is just so much of a CIA military caricature that, like, yeah, he would shoot him because, like, what else would he do? Like, that is the most extreme thing he could do. Why would he not shoot him? When he pulled the gun, I was like, oh, God. Not thinking that, like, anything bad would happen. But normally, there's a sense of, like, civility with everybody who shows up at the camp. They're not, like, looking to shoot other people. So it was just, like, a big, like, okay, buddy, sure. And Hawkeye is like, yeah, I guess we gotta let him have his guy, you know? Because he's got a gun, and what can I do? Even if Hawkeye had the gun, it's not like they're gonna do a Italian cowboy movie standoff between the two, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it was also just like, you know, they needed to like wrap the plot up as well, of course. But just like in universe, I'm just like, I don't know. I think that I would just be like, yeah, dude, shoot me. But also, what do I know?
This happened with 3 minutes of the episode left. I was like, this is kind of insane. Very, very abrupt ending this season. With the first episode too, with what's his face just kind of dancing away.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So far in this season, pretty abrupt endings, because the whole, like, funny way they get out of it is that, you know, Klinger wanted a trip to Seoul anyway, and they were going to take this North Korean spy to Seoul, and they just kind of, like, swapped them out. They sent Klinger on the bus with Colonel Flagg, and I thought that was very comical.
That was insane. I was like, oh, so Klinger's going to die. Flagg's going to shoot him. He's going to be like, what are you doing here?
Yeah, I felt the same way, because I mean, like, the fact that Klinger kind of like winked at the camera was very funny to me. But then I thought about it for like 30 seconds, and I was like, wait a minute. So Flagg supposedly already shot this kid for supposedly like running away, trying to like escape him. Okay, sure, if we believe that. And then also, so they put Klinger on a bus with him. Like, who knows if he's gonna just go Colonel Flagg on him and just kill him? Like, that's terrible. Yeah. But also, I guess it didn't happen.
Obviously, our man Klinger's fine, but like, you can't just send a man off with like a CIA officer ready to kill a man and just like be sent home. He would be like court-martialed at the very least. I don't know. Maybe that's how he gets his Section 8. Maybe he'd be like, you know what? You're not good enough for the military. Get out of here. But obviously, good old Jamie Farr gonna be back next week, I assume.
Speaking of that, too, one of my favorite lines from this episode was in the beginning when Frank is telling Klinger, you're a disgrace to man and womanhood.
He gets so angry at Klinger. The way he yells like, oh, shut up, is like the angriest shut up I've ever heard on TV.
There was vitriol in that. Like, Frank was like screaming in this episode. I was like, bro, what the heck?
Like, my throat felt sore hearing him yell, shut up.
Right? Because he did it in that very like Frank tone of voice still, like very like high pitched still, but also very angry. And I'm like, ugh. Yikes.
So, do you want to talk about your favorite lines from this episode, if you have any more in the tank that you haven't brought up yet?
I have so many, but I'm only going to... I'm going to get to a couple. When they were in the tent, when they were in the swamp, and Hawkeye was sleeping, and Frank goes... He goes to Trapper, is he sleeping? And Trapper goes, no, Frank, he heard so much about rigor mortis, he thought he would try it. That really got me. Oh, and then also the one with Klinger in the nun outfit. And Hawkeye says something along the lines of, like, go slip into something secular. That did it for me. That also, I was just rolling.
Yeah, I wish Father Mulcahy was around. I wanted to see his little
that would have been so good.
That.
So good.
Because you know he would have said something, like, incredible after seeing Klinger in that outfit.
Absolutely.
I have to say, one of my favorite lines in this episode was Radar comes in and for some reason he's freaking out. I don't remember why. And Hawkeye is just like, Radar, what's wrong? Your slight but sturdy body is all a tremble. Amazing. Only Hawkeye says stuff like that and like sells it so well.
Yeah, you know how we're always like, or you always say, Henry must have been like preparing for that line. Like it feels like Hawkeye just like said that right then and there.
Mm-hmm. And I gotta shout out one of the weirder ones, because these are always fun to bring up. Margaret at one point is like, if I didn't hate violence, I would kick you, Hawkeye. And he responds, oh, would you? With heels?
That was a good one too. I liked that one.
I just like I like the weird little moments in the show of like, oh, that's maybe a thing for somebody. Anyway, do you have trivia for us?
Like this episode, I have a bit of disjointed trivia. So, like we mentioned, the Korean identification cards, these were issued by the Republic of Korea, which is South Korea, to distinguish between North and South Korean citizens. They are still required to be carried by every person over the age of 17, as far as like my research goes.
Oh, really?
The source I used was in Korean, so I did have to translate it, so I don't know how reliable that information is. And then, like I said, for this episode, I think that they were probably using the same identification card because of things like, oh, maybe someone was technically like North Korean, or like identification cards got messed up in the displacement of the war. So I also did a little bit of research about execution of prisoners during the Korean War. That was like a super heavy topic that I just like touched on a little bit. So I think I mentioned in the episode, like, I don't know necessarily if that was like super realistic that Flagg would have been executing this Korean soldier. Probably would have just kept him as like a POW for like a prisoner exchange type of thing. But that being said, I did find a source that said there are many pretrial executions carried out by the South Korean military that the U.S. military and even General MacArthur knew about, especially during the earlier days of the war. Some 2,000 political prisoners by some estimates. And I will link this information all in the description of our episode. So if you want to kind of just check that out a little bit more. I also mentioned Desmond Doss, who was the real-life medic who refused to carry a gun during World War II. And I do have information about him as well if you want to, like investigate him. Hacksaw Ridge was, you know, an award-winning movie, so...
Oh, okay. When you brought up Hacksaw Ridge, I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about, so I would like
to... Oh, really?
Yeah, I never saw that. I was like, oh, Mel Gibson movie? Not interested.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I wish that I had done a little bit more digging, but I just figured like because the movie was made on him, like I didn't have to like recount all of it, but
okay.
I will link some information about Desmond Doss because it is a pretty cool story. Anyway, okay, so I do have a little bit more fun trivia about one of the guest stars of this episode. So Richard Lee Sung was the actor who was one of the several Kim Lucks in this episode. Lee Sung was born in El Paso, Texas, and moved to Los Angeles in early childhood. He served in the U.S. Marines during the Korean War and earned a Purple Heart, so that's really cool.
That's really cool.
So this is something that when I was looking up trivia, I loved this. So because he's bald, apparently he was known for telling like hair jokes all the time, and he also liked to be called Curly. And I love that sense of humor. That is just so funny.
You look familiar, but that's awesome. I love that. That is really funny.
And he also did a lot of guest roles. So he was in MASH for 11 episodes playing like kind of various characters.
Maybe that's where I've seen him from if he's in a couple episodes.
I think that he's in mostly later episodes. Like I definitely remember him in later seasons. But he was also in shows in the MASH universe, including After MASH and Trapper John MD.
Of course he was. The extended MASH universe.
He also did guest roles in Happy Days, The Apple Dumpling Gang, and The Incredible Hulk, along with a lot of other sitcoms from the 70s and 80s into the 90s. And Lee Sung passed away in 2021 at the age of 91 from natural causes, which, like, amazing. That man was so bald and healthy. Amazing.
Well, you know, when you go bald, you're good for the rest of your life if you go bald young.
But yeah, so I thought that was just really cool.
Yeah, no, that's I love the hair jokes. Based on what you're telling me, really fun guy, and I'm glad that he lived to be quite old.
So, Ethan, What is your martini rating for this episode?
Oh, okay. This is a tricky one because first impression, not very strong. Talking about this episode, I'm like, well, actually, it's pretty good thematically, pretty good character exploration of Hawkeye, and more cohesive than I originally thought it would be. So I'm gonna have to go like higher than I originally kind of thought. Maybe a 3.5 out of 5. You know, pretty solid, nothing crazy, but you know, gets the job done. A pretty decent martini. What about you?
I would have to agree. I would say 3.5. I was like kind of grappling whether this should be a 4 or not, but I do think that 3.5 is just like where I'm at for this episode. See, like that's the thing, right? Is that I was grappling with the 4 because I was like, oh, but it has my favorite line in it. And it also like has the carry a gun soliloquy, basically. And I just love those two things. They're like such like quintessential like MASH fandom things for me. But objectively, I would say like probably 3.5 because like after deconstructing the episode a little bit, I do like it a lot more.
For me, I think if the ending was stronger, if it felt a little less rushed, this would be a much better episode as a whole. Mm-hmm. But it just kind of was like, oh, we ran out of time. We need to have a final joke with Klinger. Let's just do this real quick and just be done. But, overall, pretty good one. And like you're saying, maybe this episode's iconic. Maybe there's a lot of, iconic stuff in this one.
Watch this be on, our top list for this
I
season.
know, right? I know.
No, I don't think so. But, who knows? Check us out for the rest of the season.
Yes, please listen to every single episode and tell your friends. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Good night. More seriously, just to wrap up, we'd like to give thanks to Jacob for your Balco for being our technical consultant, Melissa, Vanessa's sister, for our awesome cover art, and, of course, our listeners. Links to our music, social media, and contact for the show are in the description, as always, and join us next week for Season 3, Episode 4, Iron Guts Kelly. But until then, don't forget to make your payments on the war. Goodbye, farewell, and amen.
Bye, everyone.